For 17 years, I saved every extra dollar for my daughter's college fund. No vacations, no new clothes, just hard work and discipline. It reached $50,000, our safety net, their future. Then one morning, I opened the account and froze. The balance was zero. My husband's phone was off, his office said he hadn't shown up, and my daughters exchanged a look I couldn't understand. When I told them the money was gone, they didn't panic. They just said they had already handled it. That was the moment I realized something much bigger was happening. My name is Claire Dawson, and I've spent nearly 2 decades balancing 2 jobs while raising 2 daughters, Libby and Natalie. Every overtime shift, every late night at the hospital, every skipped outing had one purpose: their future. I wanted them to have the education I never could afford. Their college fund was the result of years of sacrifice, small savings slowly stacking up. Each month, I deposited whatever I could, no matter how tight things were. It became a quiet promise I made to myself, that no matter what happened, their path would stay secure. My husband, Brian, managed most of our household expenses. He was charming, confident, and always had the right words to make me feel safe. I trusted him with everything, including the finances. He often said he wanted to take the load off my shoulders. I thought it was love. I didn't question it. I never imagined that the same man who shared my bed could also be planning something that would tear our family apart. For years, we looked like any normal family from the outside, but under that calm surface, cracks were already forming. Libby, my oldest, was the responsible one, always studying, always helping me around the house. Natalie, younger by 3 years, was the creative soul, curious about technology and fascinated with computers. I was proud of both of them. They were my reason for every hard day. I told them education would be their ticket to freedom, the one thing no one could ever take away. That college fund wasn't just money, it was love, hard work, and years of trust piled into numbers on a screen. I believed it was untouchable, protected, and safe. I still remember that morning clearly. The house was quiet, and sunlight filled the kitchen. I made coffee and opened my laptop, ready to check on bills and balances like I always did. My hand froze over the trackpad when I saw the numbers. The college fund account didn't show 50,000. It showed zero. I blinked hard, refreshing the page again and again, hoping it was some kind of error, but the more I looked, the clearer it became. The account wasn't missing a portion. It had been completely drained. Every dollar was gone. At first, I thought maybe the bank made a mistake. I called customer service, but they confirmed the withdrawals. Each transfer had been authorized by someone with joint access. That meant Brian. My chest tightened as I listened, trying to process the words. My mind went blank. I ended the call and tried reaching Brian. His phone went straight to voicemail. I called again and again. Nothing. His car wasn't in the driveway. He hadn't left a note. He just vanished, leaving behind an empty account and a silence that grew heavier by the second. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the coffee that had gone cold. My mind raced with every possible explanation. Maybe it was for a surprise. Maybe an emergency. Maybe something temporary. None of those thoughts held up for long. The girls came down the stairs, still in pajamas, talking softly. When I told them the college fund was gone, I expected panic, confusion, or tears. But they didn't react that way. They just looked at each other, then at me, calm and composed. Libby gave a small nod to Natalie. Something passed between them. Natalie sat beside me, her voice steady as she said they already knew about it. My heart dropped. They knew. I didn't understand. She explained that they had been watching Brian for months. The shock hit harder than the missing money. I felt blindsided, not just by Brian, but by how long my daughters had been keeping something from me. Natalie reached for my hand, telling me they'd been trying to protect me until they were sure. I couldn't speak. I didn't know if I should feel grateful, angry, or terrified about what was coming next. They told me it started by accident. Natalie had borrowed Brian's laptop for schoolwork. She found unusual email notifications and some bank alerts that didn't match our accounts. Curiosity turned into suspicion, and suspicion turned into digging. She found out Brian had been transferring money in small chunks to another account under a different name. The name that appeared alongside his wasn't mine. It was Jessica. My heart sank when I heard it. Jessica worked with Brian. I'd met her once at a company event. She had smiled at me like nothing in the world was wrong. Natalie didn't stop there. She knew enough about computers to trace where the money was going. She pieced together emails, transfers, and digital footprints Brian thought he'd deleted. Libby helped her cross-check everything. Together they uncovered months of lies. Brian wasn't just having an affair. He was planning a new life with Jessica, funded by the money meant for his daughter's education. $50,000 had been quietly moved out of our account into one only they had access to. Each transfer was carefully timed to avoid suspicion. It was methodical, calculated, and heartless. I sat there, barely able to breathe. Every word they said cut deeper. Natalie showed me the records she'd saved, screenshots of transfers, copies of messages between Brian and Jessica, all of it neatly organized like a case file. Libby said they'd been waiting to gather enough proof before telling me. They didn't want me to confront him too early. I realized they'd been carrying this weight alone, trying to protect me from another heartbreak. It hurt knowing they'd suffered in silence, but it also filled me with something else, an uneasy sense of pride. The evidence was undeniable. Brian wasn't planning to come back. He was planning to run. His messages to Jessica described a fantasy life far away, new house, new start, all built on stolen money. Jessica encouraged it, feeding his ego and promising him love. I couldn't believe how blind I'd been to his growing distance. All the late nights, the missed dinners, the extra business trips, they all made sense now. Every excuse had been a brick in the wall, separating him from us, and I hadn't even noticed it happening right in front of me. Natalie, being cautious, saved copies of everything in a hidden folder. She said it was their safety net. If Brian or Jessica ever tried to disappear with the money completely, they could expose them. Libby mentioned that Jessica wasn't who Brian thought she was either. She was already involved with another man, a wealthy restaurant owner. Jessica had been playing both sides, keeping Brian busy while she planned her own escape with the stolen cash. Hearing that almost made me feel sorry for him, but the anger I felt for what he'd done to our girls ran deeper. The girls decided not to tell me right away because they didn't want me to panic. They wanted to be sure they could recover the money before confronting him. They spent weeks gathering evidence quietly, acting normal around him, pretending nothing was wrong. Every night after dinner, Natalie would stay up late, doing homework, but she was actually tracking his movements. Libby helped by checking his schedule, noticing when he lied about where he was. They didn't tell a soul. It became their mission to protect our family from the man who was supposed to love us. Looking back, I saw all the signs. Brian had grown colder, more distant, always distracted. He stopped showing interest in family dinners, avoided eye contact, and barely spoke to the girls. I thought it was work stress. I kept telling myself it was temporary. I kept defending him in my own mind. But now, hearing everything laid out so clearly, it was impossible to deny. He wasn't under pressure. He was planning an escape. He was living a double life, built on lies, and funded by the savings that represented my daughter's dreams. It made me sick inside. Natalie assured me that they weren't helpless. She had already figured out a way to trace and possibly reverse the transfers. Libby had begun collecting proof that could expose Brian at his job, if needed. They weren't scared anymore. They were focused. I realized my daughters were far stronger than I ever imagined. While I had been trusting, they had been observing. While I had been hurt, they had been preparing. The moment that truth sank in, I knew one thing for certain: the man who betrayed us had no idea who he was really up against. I couldn't stop thinking about how calm my daughters were. They didn't seem surprised or shaken. They had already accepted what Brian had done long before I found out. I asked them how they planned to handle it, but they only said I'd understand soon. They didn't want to rush me into the details. My mind was clouded with anger, confusion, and disbelief. The man I thought I knew had stolen from his own family, but the way my daughters carried themselves made me feel something new. Maybe this wasn't just a loss. Maybe it was justice beginning. Libby told me they had every message, transaction, and document stored safely. They weren't just reacting emotionally. They were building a case. Natalie explained how she tracked the withdrawals through online banking logs that most people ignored. She had found Brian's pattern of behavior, each transfer matching the days he claimed to be traveling for training. I sat silently as they explained it, overwhelmed by how methodical they'd been. They had turned their pain into focus. I realized I was no longer just a mother trying to hold things together. I was part of something bigger now. They didn't want me to confront Brian yet. Natalie said it would ruin their plan. She had a specific timeline in mind and needed him to believe no one suspected a thing. It felt strange, letting my daughters take control of a situation this heavy, but they were right. Brian still had no idea he was being watched. I agreed to stay quiet. Every instinct in me screamed to call him out, to demand answers, but I trusted them. They were careful, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like we might win this battle. That night, after they went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at our family photo on the wall. Brian's arm around my shoulders, his smile so convincing, I wondered how long that picture had been a lie. The more I thought about it, the clearer everything became. The secretive phone calls, the new cologne, the sudden interest in fitness. All those small changes I brushed aside now painted a clear picture. He hadn't just drifted away. He had been preparing to leave us long before the first dollar vanished from that account. The next morning, Natalie showed me something she'd been working on. It was a timeline she created, tracking every email and transfer. It looked like a detective's board, complete with notes and dates. She said the next step was to secure the evidence somewhere safe outside the house, in case Brian tried to destroy it. Libby offered to handle that part. I felt proud and heartbroken all at once, watching my girls take on a responsibility no child should have to bear. But their confidence was unshakable, and it gave me the courage to keep going. Before we continue and see how this unfolds, if you're listening right now, take a moment to like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It means a lot, and it helps us share more stories like this. The following days felt strange. Brian returned home, acting like nothing was wrong. He greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, smiling as if we were still a normal family. I played along, though it made my stomach turn. I watched him closely, noticing the subtle guilt hiding in his gestures. He didn't meet my eyes when he spoke. Libby stayed polite. Natalie stayed quiet. We were all pretending now, but beneath that calm surface, a quiet storm was brewing. Every word, every look carried a new kind of meaning. He just didn't realize it yet. Natalie began collecting his digital footprints in secret. She monitored his work laptop, emails, and cloud backups using small programs she designed herself. She found that Brian was communicating with Jessica through encrypted folders, sending her travel receipts, pictures, and bank screenshots. He even bragged about how easy it was to fool me. Reading those words crushed me. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the pride in how he did it. Natalie copied everything. She didn't react emotionally. She told me emotion would come later. For now, they needed to stay focused and keep gathering proof. Libby handled things differently. She paid attention to his routines, his tone, and his habits. She started noticing when he lied about his schedule, when he avoided family dinners, when his excuses changed slightly. She recorded the patterns in a small notebook. The contrast between my two daughters amazed me, one technical, one observant, both equally determined. They were working like a team of investigators, and I felt like a witness inside my own home. It was painful, but also empowering. Every new discovery turned the pain into quiet resolve. I began to want justice more than revenge. Brian grew careless as his confidence increased. He started staying out later, dressing better, acting younger. He thought he had already gotten away with it. Jessica sent him messages full of flattery and promises, fueling his fantasy of a new life. Natalie showed me one email where he wrote that he deserved a second chance at happiness. It was like reading a stranger's words. The man who once promised to protect our daughters had become someone willing to destroy them for his own pride. That realization hurt, but it also made the mission to expose him personal. Natalie and Libby kept collecting evidence quietly, making sure nothing was missed. Natalie even managed to trace Jessica's personal information using her online accounts. What she found changed everything. Jessica wasn't just leading Brian on. She had another man in her life, a wealthy restaurant owner from the city. They exchanged photos, messages, and even talked about running away once she had secured the funds. Libby and Natalie realized Jessica was preparing to steal from Brian the same way he stole from us. It was cruel justice, but they decided to turn that betrayal to their advantage. Brian started becoming more paranoid. He sensed Jessica was pulling away. He called her constantly, left messages that went unanswered. Libby overheard one of his phone calls when he was pacing in the backyard. His tone was desperate. Jessica's silence made him nervous, but he still didn't suspect that we knew everything. Natalie told me that this was the moment she'd been waiting for, the point when his control started slipping. Once a man like Brian began to panic, he would make mistakes. And when he made mistakes, she'd be ready to strike back without warning. Libby continued to play her part perfectly. She asked Brian about college tours and scholarships, as if nothing had changed. He pretended to listen, but his mind was elsewhere. Natalie, meanwhile, prepared hidden backups of every file, sending them to a secure drive that only she could access. I watched them plan with quiet efficiency, almost like professionals. Every night, after Brian fell asleep, they reviewed what they'd collected. It amazed me how calm they remained through all of it. I realized I wasn't leading them anymore. They were leading me toward the truth. Weeks passed, and the situation between Brian and Jessica started collapsing. Her other boyfriend had found out about their affair and confronted her. Natalie discovered it through messages Jessica thought were private. The confrontation between Jessica and her real boyfriend became office gossip, spreading fast through Brian's workplace. It embarrassed him publicly. His coworkers whispered behind his back, and his boss started questioning his focus. I didn't feel sorry for him. He was finally facing a small taste of humiliation compared to what he had done to us. But the real reckoning hadn't even started yet. Brian came home that evening, angry and restless. He slammed doors, muttered to himself, and refused to eat dinner. Libby stayed out of his way, while Natalie quietly recorded his outburst on her phone from the hallway. He didn't notice. His voice was filled with panic as he cursed Jessica for betraying him. I watched from the kitchen, silent. That phone recording would later become one of the strongest pieces of evidence we had. It captured his admission about transferring the money. The same money he thought would build a new life was about to end his old one. The following day, Brian spent hours locked in his office, making calls. Natalie monitored his computer remotely and saw him trying to move the last remaining funds from the shared account. But before he could, she intercepted. Using her access, she froze the transfers temporarily, buying them time. She told me they would reverse everything once he was fully distracted. That distraction came faster than expected. Jessica's other boyfriend had created chaos at Brian's company, sharing details of the affair online. Brian was drowning in embarrassment, trying to contain a scandal he could no longer control. Natalie used that chaos as her opening. She stayed up all night, eyes fixed on her laptop screen, carefully transferring the stolen money back into the college fund. I stood beside her, barely breathing as the numbers updated. Bit by bit, the balance began to rise. When it finally hit 50,000 again, she exhaled for the first time in hours. Libby double-checked the transactions to confirm everything was back in our account. It felt unreal, like watching justice unfold right there on the computer screen. The money was home, and Brian had no idea it was gone from him. The next morning, Brian noticed the missing funds and spiraled into rage. He tore through his drawers, his laptop, and his phone, trying to find what went wrong. Libby and I pretended not to notice, acting confused when he muttered about bank errors. He left the house in a fury, heading to work to fix it. Natalie stayed calm, saying this was all part of the plan. Now that the money was safe, it was time to make sure Brian faced real consequences, not just personal loss, but public accountability. She already knew exactly how to do it. Libby took the lead on the next step. She forwarded the copies of Brian's emails and attachments to his company's internal compliance department. Those emails showed him using work resources to communicate with Jessica and plan his escape. It included dates, times, and inappropriate exchanges during office hours. Natalie made sure everything was documented in a way that couldn't be traced back to them. Within hours, Brian's messages began spreading quietly through his workplace. He didn't know yet, but the walls were closing in. His double life was unraveling faster than he could control. By the afternoon, Brian's boss called him in for a meeting. He returned home late that night, looking pale and shaken. His job was gone. He didn't say a word to me or the girls. He just poured himself a drink and sat in silence. The weight of what he'd lost was starting to hit him. Jessica had disappeared. The money was gone, and now his career had ended in disgrace. The man who once felt untouchable was crumbling right in front of us. I didn't feel pity. I only felt relief that the truth had finally caught up to him. The days that followed were tense. Brian spent most of his time locked in the study, trying to figure out what had happened. He called Jessica repeatedly, leaving angry voicemails that went unanswered. Natalie kept recording everything. Every call, every rant, every desperate attempt to shift blame became part of our growing file of evidence. I kept my distance, pretending not to know anything, though it was hard to stay quiet. My daughters remained composed, acting like normal teenagers while quietly documenting every move he made. They knew his downfall had only just begun. Jessica finally cut off all contact. She vanished completely, leaving no trail behind. Brian began to unravel. He stayed up late, pacing, drinking, and muttering to himself. He accused everyone around him of betrayal, but never once looked in the mirror. Libby said he was showing the same desperation he caused in us months ago. Karma had arrived, and she was watching it unfold without saying a word. Natalie told me it was almost time. She wanted him to face the truth directly, from us, with no way out. That confrontation would be the final step. I prepared myself mentally for that day. I gathered every printed document the girls had compiled, the emails, the bank records, the screenshots, the recordings. The stack was thick enough to fill a folder. I placed it on the dining table, waiting for the right moment. Brian's downfall wasn't going to happen through shouting or fighting. It would happen through calm truth. The same truth he had tried to bury beneath his lies. For the first time since the nightmare began, I wasn't afraid of him anymore. The fear had turned into quiet strength. When Brian came downstairs the next morning, still half-dressed and exhausted, Libby was waiting. She handed him a sealed envelope. Inside were printouts of his messages to Jessica. He froze as he read them, realizing he'd been exposed. Natalie stepped forward and placed her phone on the table, playing one of the recorded conversations. His voice filled the room, bragging about moving the money. His expression changed instantly, from denial to fear. The evidence was undeniable. Every word, every action was captured. The mask he had worn for so long finally cracked in front of his own family. I told him he had two choices. He could leave quietly and sign the divorce papers or face criminal charges supported by irrefutable evidence. His arrogance faded as he looked at his daughters standing beside me. The same girls he once saw as naive were now the reason he couldn't run. He sat down, defeated, hands shaking slightly, as he realized there was no escape. He had lost everything: his money, his job, his mistress, and now his family. The silence in that moment carried more weight than any argument could. He knew it was over. By sunrise, he was gone. He packed what little he could and walked out without looking back. I watched from the window as his car disappeared down the street. The house felt lighter, even with the pain still lingering. Libby hugged me quietly. Natalie closed her laptop one last time, her expression calm and certain. We had survived the storm together. The college fund was restored, the truth exposed, and the person who betrayed us was finally out of our lives. It wasn't victory through anger. It was victory through strength, unity, and truth. The morning after Brian left, the house was quiet, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. It wasn't heavy or tense anymore. It was peaceful. I made breakfast for the girls, and we sat together without pretending. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. The college fund was safe, the evidence secured, and the storm behind us. The girls talked about school and plans again, like normal teenagers. It hit me then, after everything, they hadn't lost their light. They just learned how to fight for it. The next week, I met with a lawyer to start the divorce process officially. There were no disputes left to argue. Brian had nothing to stand on. Every lie was documented, every betrayal recorded. My lawyer said it was one of the cleanest cases he'd ever seen. Hearing that gave me a strange kind of peace. I wasn't angry anymore. The exhaustion was real, but so was the relief. It was over. I could finally start thinking about the future without wondering what secret was waiting behind the next door or message notification. Brian tried reaching out a few times through email. His messages were filled with regret, excuses, and attempts to justify himself. He said he made a mistake. I didn't reply. The old me might have looked for closure, but the woman sitting here now knew better. Some people only feel sorry when they lose control, not when they cause harm. The girls told me not to respond, and I didn't. I deleted his emails, one by one, until there was nothing left of him on my screen or in my heart. It was time to move forward. Libby focused on her studies again. She started preparing for college interviews and entrance exams. Natalie, on the other hand, used her technical skills to help me organize finances, creating digital folders for every bill, document, and receipt. She wanted to make sure nothing like this could happen again. I realized she wasn't just being careful, she was trying to protect us. They both were. I watched them grow stronger with every passing day. The pain had changed us, but it hadn't broken us. If anything, it made us sharper, wiser, and closer than ever before. I decided to take a short break from work to recover emotionally. I needed time to process everything that had happened. The first few days felt strange. The house felt too quiet without Brian's footsteps, too clean without his chaos. But the quiet began to feel good. I found myself enjoying the small moments again. Morning coffee, music, while cleaning, long talks with my daughters. Life was simple but honest, and that honesty felt better than any comfort built on lies. I didn't miss him. I missed who I thought he was, and that version never really existed. Natalie started attending online cybersecurity classes after school. She said she wanted to learn more about digital safety, maybe even pursue it as a career. I smiled, thinking about how her curiosity had once uncovered an entire web of deceit. Libby applied to a few medical programs, confident in her grades and dedication. Watching them plan their futures made me realize that the best revenge wasn't destruction, it was success. They weren't just surviving what Brian had done, they were turning it into fuel for something better. That thought gave me a peace I hadn't felt in years. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, Libby mentioned how strange it felt to finally have the truth out in the open. She said secrets have weight, and once they're gone, everything feels lighter. I understood that completely. We had all carried a secret for too long. Brian's lies had trapped us in silence. Now that silence was gone, replaced by open conversations and shared laughter. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a woman surviving betrayal. I felt like a mother rebuilding her life, surrounded by strength she helped create. I still had moments of doubt. Late at night, I'd think about how easily everything could have gone differently. If Natalie hadn't checked his computer that day, if Libby hadn't helped her plan so carefully, Brian might have disappeared with everything. We might have lost not only the money, but our trust in each other. The thought made me shiver. But it also made me thankful. Sometimes, the worst moments in life reveal the strongest parts of us. My daughters had proven that beyond any measure, they saved more than money. They saved our family's dignity. I checked the college account one last time that week, just to be sure everything was still there. The balance hadn't changed. Seeing that number gave me more comfort than I could ever describe. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about what it represented: sacrifice, unity, and the power of truth. I printed a screenshot and kept it in my journal. It served as a reminder that no matter how dark things get, effort and honesty always find a way to win. I didn't need revenge or apology. That number on the screen was enough closure. As time passed, Brian's absence became normal. People in the neighborhood stopped asking about him. His friends drifted away quietly once they heard what he'd done. There was no sympathy left for him, not even from his own family. Word spread about his affair and the money theft. Though I never shared any details myself, I didn't need to. The truth had a way of finding its own audience. Libby said justice doesn't always happen in court. It happens when a person faces the weight of their own actions. Watching that happen was more satisfying than punishment. A few months later, I received a letter from Brian's company. It confirmed his termination and mentioned that he was barred from holding any managerial position due to misconduct. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not out of spite, but as proof that some systems still worked. Natalie joked that it was poetic justice. I smiled, but didn't say much. Inside, I felt a calm sense of fairness. He had gambled everything for a fantasy and lost it all. Meanwhile, the daughters he underestimated were walking into a stronger, brighter future. Our home started feeling different. Warmer, safer, quieter in the best way. I noticed small changes everywhere. The girls laughed more often, the air felt lighter, and even the way sunlight filled the room seemed softer. I think peace has a sound, and it's the absence of tension. There were no hidden looks or forced smiles anymore, just genuine calm. We started cooking dinners together, trying new recipes, sharing stories. It was simple, but it felt like healing. We weren't just a family again, we were a new version of one, built from honesty instead of illusion. One afternoon, while cleaning out drawers, I found old photos of Brian with the girls when they were little. For a moment, sadness hit me like a wave. There had been good memories once, vacations, laughter, birthdays. I couldn't erase those years, even if I wanted to. But as I looked closer at those pictures, I realized something important. The happiness in those photos didn't come from him. It came from us. It came from the love I gave my daughters, from their innocence, from the bond we had built long before betrayal entered our home. That realization changed how I saw everything. The pain wasn't just an ending, it was a transformation. It had stripped away the lies and left behind something honest. I stopped avoiding the past and started learning from it. The girls noticed it too. They said I seemed lighter, more relaxed. Maybe it was because I finally stopped wondering why. Some questions don't need answers to be closed. What mattered now was that we were safe, free, and stronger than before. Brian's choices no longer defined us. Our response to them did. And that made all the difference. Libby's acceptance letters started arriving. The first one came from a university she had dreamed of since childhood. She screamed in excitement, and we all hugged in the kitchen. Natalie filmed it on her phone, laughing through tears. That moment felt like a victory over every sleepless night, every betrayal, every doubt. It reminded me that no matter how deep the hurt, love and effort always win in the end. The college fund wasn't just restored, it had fulfilled its purpose. My daughters' futures were finally secure, exactly as I had promised them all those years ago. Natalie, too, received news of her full scholarship for computer science. When she showed me the email, I couldn't stop crying. She had taken the same skill that uncovered deceit and turned it into her dream. I told her that her intelligence had saved us, and she smiled, saying she only wanted to make me proud. I told her she already had. That night, as I watched them plan dorm rooms and classes, I realized that the story that began with betrayal was ending with triumph. The scars would stay, but so would the strength that came from surviving. We threw a small celebration at home, nothing fancy, just dinner, cake, and laughter. Friends and relatives who stood by us came over. Nobody mentioned Brian. His name had become irrelevant. The focus was on the girls, their hard work, their future. Everyone could see the pride in my eyes. It wasn't about revenge or money anymore. It was about resilience. The world had tried to break us, but we built something stronger from the pieces. That night, when I went to bed, I finally slept without anxiety. The silence felt peaceful, not empty. That was true healing. As the months went on, small traces of Brian still appeared here and there. Old letters, photos, receipts. Each time I found one, I threw it away. I didn't need reminders of deceit. My daughters did the same. The past no longer had a place in our home. We talked more about the future, career goals, travel plans, and the kind of people we wanted to become. It felt like our life had restarted. Every day that passed was proof that even the deepest betrayal can't destroy a family built on real love and unity. Libby started volunteering at a local hospital before college began. She wanted to give back, to help others rebuild like we did. Natalie helped a few classmates learn computer security basics, warning them about online scams. I watched them both using their pain to protect others. That's when it hit me. The girls hadn't just grown stronger, they had grown wiser. Their compassion hadn't died with betrayal. It had multiplied. They weren't bitter. They were brave. I realized then that the legacy of what Brian had done wasn't destruction, it was transformation through courage and love. Occasionally, I still wondered where Brian ended up. I'd heard rumors he'd moved to another city, struggling to find steady work. Part of me felt nothing about it. Another part felt sorry for the man he'd become. He'd traded everything real for a fantasy, and lost both. Meanwhile, our home was thriving. Libby's laughter filled the house, Natalie's focus never wavered, and I had rediscovered what peace felt like. Maybe that was justice. The quiet kind that doesn't need applause. Only time. He chose greed. We chose truth. And truth always wins, even if it takes a while. One afternoon, while organizing papers, I came across the phone where Natalie had stored the recordings. I played one out of curiosity. Hearing Brian's voice again didn't hurt the way I expected. It felt distant, like a story that belonged to someone else. I listened for a minute, then deleted it. The evidence had served its purpose. Keeping it meant keeping the past alive. And we didn't need it anymore. Closure isn't forgetting. It's deciding what deserves space in your life. That day, I made room for peace, and I've protected that space ever since. Life became ordinary again, and ordinary felt good. Morning routines returned, the smell of coffee, the sound of my daughters rushing for school, and laughter echoing through the hallway. I didn't take any of it for granted anymore. Every normal moment felt like a gift. I found joy in the smallest things, watching the girls study, eating dinner together, or just sitting on the porch at sunset. We didn't talk about the betrayal anymore. We didn't have to. The story had already written its ending, and that ending belonged to us, not to him. As Libby packed for college, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a note she'd written months earlier when everything was falling apart. It said, "We'll fix it, Mom. Trust us." She smiled when she saw the tears in my eyes. She told me she had kept that promise the moment she pressed record on her phone. That note became one of my most treasured keepsakes. It reminded me of the moment my daughters became my heroes. The moment they turned fear into strength and silence into justice. I'll never forget that. The day we dropped Libby off at college was emotional. Natalie and I helped her move into her dorm, setting up her desk and bed while she chatted excitedly with her new roommate. Watching her walk confidently across campus, I felt both sadness and pride. She had survived something that could have broken her and turned it into motivation. Natalie hugged me tight, saying Libby would be fine, and she was right. That day didn't feel like goodbye, it felt like a victory lap, after years of fighting for a dream that no one could take away anymore. Driving back home with Natalie beside me, the sun setting outside the window, I realized how far we had come. The fear, the betrayal, the uncertainty, all of it had led to this quiet strength. Natalie rested her head on my shoulder and said she was glad it was all behind us. I told her I was too. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anxious about what tomorrow might bring. I only felt grateful for the lessons, the love, and the resilience we found together. The storm had passed, and peace had finally stayed. A few weeks later, Natalie began preparing for her own move to college. The house felt strangely empty without Libby, and I knew it would feel even quieter once Natalie left too. But this time, the quiet didn't scare me. It felt like freedom, the kind that comes after years of uncertainty. Natalie was confident, ready for her next step. As she packed, she told me she was proud of how we handled everything. Her calm, steady voice reminded me that while betrayal had broken something, it had also built something new, an unshakable sense of family trust. Before she left, Natalie sat down with me and showed me something on her laptop. It was a program she had written to monitor personal finances securely, something she wanted to share online for other families. She said it was inspired by what we went through. I felt tears in my eyes. Out of all the pain, she had created something that would help others avoid what we had suffered. I realized then that resilience wasn't just about surviving, it was about turning pain into purpose. Natalie had done exactly that, and I couldn't have been prouder. When Natalie finally left for college, the house grew quiet again. I walked past their empty rooms and felt a mix of sadness and pride. Their laughter still lingered in my mind, and the memories of everything we'd been through felt distant, like another lifetime. I spent the evening cleaning their rooms, folding leftover clothes, and realizing how much they had grown. The pain that once filled this home had turned into peace. Every corner that once held tension now held gratitude. My daughters were safe, their futures secure, and that was all that mattered now. With both girls in college, I started focusing on myself for the first time in years. I joined a local support group for women who had been through financial betrayal. Sharing my story helped others open up about theirs. It was shocking how many had faced similar pain but stayed silent out of shame. I realized how common it was, how secrecy protected those who hurt others. I decided I wouldn't be quiet about it anymore. I wanted to show people that losing money wasn't the end. It was losing trust that hurt most, but even that could heal. I started journaling every night, writing about the journey from the first discovery to the moment Brian walked out. It became therapy. Putting it into words made the memories lose their sting. Over time, the pages filled with lessons instead of pain. The story no longer felt like tragedy. It felt like transformation. Each entry reminded me how strong my daughters had been, how brave they were in the face of deceit. I didn't write out of anger anymore. I wrote out of gratitude, because what could have destroyed us instead revealed who we truly were. One morning, I received an email from a local community center. They had heard about my support group sessions and wanted me to speak at an event about financial safety and emotional recovery. My first instinct was to decline. Public speaking wasn't my strength. But then, I thought of Libby and Natalie. They had faced far scarier things with courage. I accepted. The night before the event, I rehearsed in front of the mirror, nervous but determined. I didn't want to tell a story of betrayal. I wanted to tell a story of survival and rebuilding trust. When the day arrived, I stood before a small crowd of women and began telling my story. I started with the morning I found the empty account and ended with how my daughters exposed the truth. People listened quietly, some wiping away tears. When I finished, several women came up to thank me. One said my story gave her courage to confront her own situation. In that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes healing isn't just about what you overcome. It's about helping others find the strength to do the same. It gave my pain new meaning. After that event, I began speaking regularly at workshops. It wasn't something I planned. It just happened naturally. People kept inviting me, wanting to hear more. I talked about emotional manipulation, financial trust, and the importance of awareness. I saw women take notes, nodding as if they'd lived the same experiences. It felt powerful to turn something so dark into something that helped others. I wasn't defined by betrayal anymore. I was defined by how I responded to it. And that made me stronger than I ever thought possible when I sat crying in that kitchen months ago. Brian's name came up once during one of my talks. A woman asked what happened to him. I told her honestly that I didn't know, and I didn't care. The audience laughed softly, not in mockery, but in understanding. That was the truth. His story had ended for me the day he left. I didn't need closure, revenge, or answers. He had already written his ending through his choices. My story was still going, and it was mine alone. It felt freeing to say that out loud, to let go completely in front of people who truly understood. Around that same time, Libby called with good news. She had been chosen for a scholarship abroad for her medical program. I could hear the excitement in her voice. She said she wanted to study pediatrics and one day open a clinic for underprivileged kids. Hearing her say that filled me with emotion. She was building a future out of kindness, not resentment. Natalie, too, was thriving. Her cybersecurity work had caught the attention of a local firm. Both of them were turning pain into progress, proving that no betrayal could stop them from becoming who they were meant to be. One night, as I scrolled through old messages, I found the first text Brian had ever sent me years ago. It was simple, sweet, from a time when everything felt innocent. I stared at it for a while, wondering when it all changed. Then I deleted it, not out of bitterness, but because it didn't belong in my present anymore. The woman who once held on to those messages was gone. In her place stood someone who had learned that love isn't proven through promises, it's proven through actions. And actions were something Brian could never understand. I began spending more time outdoors, taking walks through the neighborhood, meeting new people, and rediscovering small joys. Life felt lighter now. Every day carried a sense of gratitude. Sometimes, I'd pass couples holding hands and wonder if I'd ever trust again. Maybe someday I would. But for now, I was content with peace. Trust didn't need to come from someone else. It started within me. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece, not by finding someone new, but by finding myself again. That realization made me smile more than any romantic gesture ever could. Months turned into a year. The house had changed. I repainted the walls, rearranged furniture, and created a small garden outside. It felt like a new space entirely, free from memories of deceit. Every flower I planted symbolized something I had overcome. Libby's graduation photo hung in the living room, and Natalie's award for her coding project sat proudly beside it. Their success was my healing. They had turned pain into purpose, and I had turned heartbreak into hope. Together we had rewritten our story, not as victims, but as survivors who refused to stay silent. On the anniversary of that day, the day I discovered the empty account, I took the morning off work and sat with a cup of coffee at the same kitchen table. The sunlight poured in just like it had then, but everything felt different now. That morning no longer represented loss. It represented the turning point that led to strength. I closed my eyes and silently thanked the version of myself who didn't give up. That day could have ended everything, but it started something instead. It started the journey that taught me how powerful love and truth can be. Libby came home for a short visit that summer, and seeing her walk through the door made me realize how much time had passed. She was more confident, more grounded. She told me about her classes, her mentors, and how she was saving up for her own apartment. I listened with pride, thinking about how she once looked so fragile when she discovered her father's betrayal. Now, she was unshakable. Life had tested her early, but it had also taught her lessons that most people learn much later. She had turned pain into wisdom, just like Natalie. That evening, Libby and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. She asked me if I ever regretted not confronting Brian sooner. I told her no. Timing had been everything. If we had acted too fast, he might have taken everything and vanished. Waiting had given us power, control, and truth. She nodded thoughtfully, saying she understood that now more than ever, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, and justice requires patience. In that quiet moment, I realized I didn't just teach my daughters strength, they had taught me patience and courage too. Later that night, Natalie called from her dorm. She said she'd been offered a paid internship at a cybersecurity firm. She laughed, saying her professors were impressed by how real-world her experience was. I couldn't help but laugh too, knowing exactly what she meant. She had learned everything from life itself. I told her how proud I was, and she said she couldn't have done any of it without me. That moment reminded me that even when life feels shattered, pieces can come together in ways you never expect. Some endings are just beginnings in disguise. The next few months brought even more changes. I received a promotion at work, after years of dedication. My supervisor said my leadership had inspired others. I smiled, thinking about how leadership was something I had learned from surviving chaos. When you've been through fire, you learn how to stay calm when others panic. That's what I had become, a calm force. My daughters were thriving, and I was finally standing tall on my own. For the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living, truly living, without fear or uncertainty holding me back. One afternoon, while sorting through some files, I found the old envelope where I kept the printed evidence against Brian. I stared at it for a long time, then took it outside to the backyard. I lit a small fire in the metal pit and watched the papers turn to ash. It felt symbolic, like closing the final chapter. The smoke drifted upward, carrying the last traces of deceit with it. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sadness, just release. Some stories don't need to be kept forever. They just need to be acknowledged, learned from, and let go. A week later, I received an unexpected email from a journalist who had attended one of my talks. She wanted to feature my story in an article about women reclaiming financial independence after betrayal. I hesitated at first, but the girls encouraged me. They said sharing our story might help others find courage, so I agreed. The article went viral within days. People from all over wrote to thank me for being honest. Reading their messages filled me with pride. What once felt like shame had turned into strength that echoed far beyond our little family. I never mentioned Brian's full name publicly, but those who knew us understood the story. I didn't share for revenge. I shared to remind others that truth always finds a way out. My daughters saw how many people were inspired, and it made them proud, too. Libby said she finally understood that even the worst chapters of life can serve a purpose. Natalie said she wanted to keep teaching others about digital safety. Together we realized our story wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about awareness, courage, and the power of taking control of your own future. Months passed, and peace became our new normal. We didn't talk about Brian anymore. Not because we were avoiding him, but because he no longer mattered. The past had lost its grip. The house, once filled with tension, now felt alive with laughter. Friends visited often, and weekends became a time for cooking, gardening, and long movie nights. The warmth that had been missing for years returned. We had built something strong, something that couldn't be taken away by lies or money. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that made it everything we needed. Every now and then, I'd receive small reminders of the past. A memory popping up on my phone, a random email thread, a bill from an old account. Each time I deleted it without hesitation. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. The difference between holding on and letting go is peace, and I chose peace every single time. Life felt simpler when it wasn't spent analyzing what went wrong. Instead, I focused on what had gone right. 2 strong daughters, a peaceful home, and the knowledge that truth had set us all free. That was enough for me. A full year passed before Brian's name came up again. A mutual acquaintance mentioned seeing him working at a small retail store in another city. I didn't react much. I just nodded and changed the subject. The version of me who once would have cared was long gone. I didn't wish him harm, but I didn't wish him well either. He was simply part of a story that ended long ago. That realization was freeing in a quiet, satisfying way. Some people stay stuck in the past, but I had chosen to build something better in the present. That evening I sat on the porch, looking at the stars and thinking about everything that had changed. From a single moment of shock to years of rebuilding, every step had shaped who we were now. Betrayal had once felt like the end of everything, but it had become the beginning of a stronger, wiser life. My daughters had grown into incredible women, and I had rediscovered my strength. I realized then that peace doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from understanding that pain can be a teacher, and I had learned every lesson it came to give. As the second year passed, I began to notice how far I'd come from that morning when I found the empty account. My life felt calm now, balanced in a way it hadn't been in years. I had stability at work, good friends, and a sense of control over my future. The girls were thriving, calling often to share updates about college. Each phone call felt like a quiet victory. Every laugh, every story they told reminded me that the darkness we faced had led us here. Peace wasn't instant. It was built day by day, moment by moment. Libby sent me a picture from her volunteer clinic abroad. She stood surrounded by children, smiling in her white coat. Seeing her there, doing what she loved, filled me with pride that words couldn't describe. She had turned the memory of betrayal into compassion for others. Natalie, too, was excelling at her internship. She messaged me about projects she was helping with, using her skills to protect people from online fraud. I couldn't have imagined a more meaningful outcome. The same pain that once shattered us had given my daughters the strength to protect others from harm. The more time passed, the less I thought about Brian at all. His name barely came to mind anymore, and when it did, it carried no emotion. The scars he left had healed into lessons. I no longer saw myself as someone who was betrayed. I saw myself as someone who rebuilt. That shift in mindset changed everything. I found myself smiling more often, laughing without guilt, and dreaming again. I realized life doesn't stop when someone breaks your trust. It just takes a new shape, one built on truth instead of illusion. That truth was my greatest reward. My evenings became my favorite part of the day. I'd sit with a cup of tea by the window, reading messages from the girls and planning small changes for the house. It felt like I was writing new chapters of my life, one peaceful routine at a time. Sometimes I would think back to the chaos we once lived in, and the difference felt unbelievable. Back then, fear ruled everything. Now calm did. I understood something powerful. Peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the mastery of it. And after everything, I had learned how to master mine. One Sunday afternoon, Natalie visited during a break from college. She brought her laptop to show me the online platform she built to help families track and protect their finances. It already had hundreds of users. Seeing her excitement reminded me how her discovery had started it all. What was once a painful revelation had turned into her calling. She told me she wanted to name the platform after me. I laughed and said she didn't have to. But she smiled and said it was because I taught her strength. That moment filled my heart with quiet joy. We sat together at the kitchen table, where everything had once fallen apart. Now it was a place of peace again. Natalie talked about her plans for the future, about working with organizations that teach financial literacy. I listened proudly, realizing how full circle everything had come. The same place that once held despair now echoed with hope. I realized the power of time. It doesn't erase pain, but it gives it purpose. Natalie's determination reminded me of the countless nights she spent uncovering lies. Now she was uncovering something far more meaningful, her own purpose. Libby called later that evening to share that she had been offered a permanent position at the hospital where she trained. Her voice was filled with excitement. She said she wanted to buy me a plane ticket to visit her and see her workplace. Tears welled in my eyes as I listened. Years ago, I worried about how I'd ever afford her education. Now she was helping others heal. That realization was overwhelming in the best way. Every hardship, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, it all led here. Hearing her happiness was the greatest repayment I could ever receive. That night, I sat outside under the stars, reflecting on everything. The sky was clear, the air calm. I thought about how pain had once made me question everything, even myself. But now, looking back, I saw how necessary it had been. It taught me resilience, courage, and the value of truth. It showed me who truly stood by me when things fell apart. And most importantly, it reminded me that the strength of a family isn't measured by wealth. It's measured by unity. The girls and I had lost money, but we had gained something priceless. I started mentoring a few women at the community center where I volunteered. Many of them were facing similar betrayals, financial, emotional, or both. Sharing my story with them became a way to keep healing. Each time I spoke, I saw the same fear in their eyes that I once had. But by the end of each session, I also saw a spark of hope. I told them that starting over doesn't mean going backward. It means stepping into a new version of yourself, one built from experience. They believed me because they could see I was living proof. One of the women I mentored told me that my story saved her from losing her savings to her partner's manipulation. Hearing that made me emotional. I realized how far-reaching one act of honesty could be. By choosing not to stay silent, I had helped others protect themselves. It made every painful moment worth it. I used to wish the betrayal had never happened, but now I understood it had given me a purpose bigger than myself. My daughters weren't just my strength anymore, they were my legacy, and that legacy was still growing every day. Libby's graduation day arrived. I flew out to attend the ceremony, sitting among a sea of proud parents. When she walked across the stage, I felt a lump in my throat. Seeing her in her white coat, receiving her degree, was surreal. This was the same girl who once cried in her bedroom after learning her father's truth. Now she was strong, confident, and unstoppable. I clapped until my hands hurt. In that moment, I realized we hadn't just survived betrayal, we had defeated it completely. It no longer had any power over us. It never would again. After the ceremony, Libby hugged me tightly and whispered that she couldn't have done it without me. I smiled and told her that she had done it all herself. The truth was, She had carried us through some of the darkest times. I had simply held on, while she and Natalie led the way. We took photos, laughed, and celebrated until late that night. I watched her from across the table, surrounded by her friends, and thought about how beautifully she had rebuilt herself. Pain had once been our teacher, but now, joy was our reward. A few weeks later, I returned home to find Natalie's picture in a local newspaper. The headline read, "Student develops app to protect families from fraud." My chest swelled with pride as I read the article. It mentioned how her personal experience had inspired her to create something meaningful. She hadn't mentioned our names, but I knew. Seeing her achievements in print was surreal. I kept that newspaper folded neatly inside my journal. I didn't need grand success for myself. Watching my daughters become everything I'd ever dreamed for them was the only success that mattered to me. Life became beautifully ordinary again. Work, calls from the girls, dinner with friends. It all flowed naturally. The chaos that once controlled my days was gone. Sometimes when I walked through the house, I'd stop in the hallway and smile. It wasn't because life was perfect. It was because I had learned to find peace even when it wasn't. That was something no one could teach you. You had to live through the storms to understand it. I didn't hate the past anymore. It had shaped me into someone I actually liked. That was its quiet gift. I started hosting Sunday dinners whenever the girls came home. We'd cook together, laugh, and share stories about our weeks. It became a new family tradition. The meals were never fancy, but they were full of warmth. We had gone from a family defined by tension to one defined by peace. Every shared meal reminded me how far we had come. I used to think broken families couldn't be repaired. Now I knew they could, not by going back to what was, but by creating something new, stronger, and grounded in truth. That was our kind of healing. One day, Natalie mentioned she'd been contacted by a nonprofit that wanted to collaborate with her app. They wanted to teach digital safety to students and families. She said she wanted me to join her in one of their sessions to share my experience again. I agreed, though I hadn't spoken publicly in months. That day, as we stood together in front of a small audience, I realized how full circle it all was. The daughter who once uncovered a betrayal was now teaching others how to protect themselves. I had never been prouder to stand beside her. During that session, I looked around the room at the people listening intently, taking notes, nodding as we spoke. It struck me how many lives could be changed by a single story. Afterward, several attendees approached us to thank us. One woman said our talk had given her the courage to confront her husband about hidden accounts. I realized then that our pain had turned into a ripple effect of empowerment. It wasn't about revenge or pity, it was about awareness. And in that awareness, people found freedom. That made every moment of our struggle feel worthwhile. As the months passed, I started writing a small book based on our journey, not for fame or recognition, but for truth. I wanted others to know that healing is possible, no matter how deep the betrayal runs. Writing it was different from journaling. It felt like documenting strength, not sorrow. Every chapter was a reminder that pain doesn't define you. Response does. When I finished the first draft, I sent copies to Libby and Natalie. They both called me the same night, emotional and proud. Hearing their voices made me realize something simple. We had truly moved on. The book gained quiet attention online, shared among communities focused on recovery and self-worth. Messages started arriving from people around the world. Some said the story saved their marriage. Others said it gave them the courage to leave. I didn't expect any of it, but it made me grateful. Sharing wasn't about revisiting pain. It was about helping others find their way out of it. Libby once told me that healing is contagious when it's shared, and she was right. The love and hope I poured into those pages reached farther than I ever imagined possible. I kept the first printed copy of that book on my nightstand. Sometimes, before bed, I'd glance at it and think about everything that led to its creation. The late nights, the heartbreak, the fear, all of it had been transformed into something meaningful. I wasn't the same woman who once begged for answers. I was someone who had found them on her own. The book wasn't just a story, it was proof that I had survived, that my daughters had flourished, and that truth had restored everything lies once stole. It was our family's quiet redemption in print. Libby called one weekend to say she'd met someone, Her voice was full of excitement, but also calm. She said he was kind, honest, and respectful. I could tell she was cautious, but hopeful. It made me smile, seeing her open her heart again after everything felt like another victory. Pain hadn't made her bitter, it had made her wiser. She didn't fear love anymore. She just understood its real value. I told her to take things slow and trust her instincts. Hearing her laugh softly on the phone reminded me that love, when genuine, always finds its way back. Natalie soon followed with her own good news. Her app had been officially approved for a national grant to expand into schools. I couldn't contain my pride. Watching both my daughters step into the world with such confidence made every hardship fade into the background. They had taken the worst thing that ever happened to us and turned it into a foundation for something powerful. I knew then that our story wasn't just about betrayal, it was about transformation. It was proof that no one can destroy you if you refuse to stop growing from what hurt you. That night, I looked through old photographs again, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Every image told a story of endurance. There were pictures of birthdays, graduations, even small moments like baking cookies or sitting by the fireplace. Those snapshots reminded me that even in hard times, love had always been there. It had carried us through everything. I used to wish I could erase the painful chapters, but now I understood they were necessary. Without them, we wouldn't have found our strength. Sometimes, the hardest seasons are the ones that teach you how to bloom again. A few months later, I was invited to a television interview to discuss the book and our journey. Sitting under the studio lights, I felt nervous but proud. The interviewer asked how I managed to stay strong through betrayal. I told her the truth. I didn't always stay strong. Some days I broke, cried, and doubted everything. But every time I fell, my daughters pulled me back up. They were my strength when I didn't have my own. The host smiled, saying she hoped my story inspired others. I told her that was the only reason I ever shared it. After that interview aired, the response was overwhelming. Letters and emails poured in from strangers who said they found hope in our story. Some said they were finally ready to start over. Others said they forgave themselves for staying silent too long. Reading those messages filled my heart. I had once felt so powerless, trapped by lies and fear. Now people were finding strength through the truth I had lived. That was the real victory. Not revenge, not closure, but impact. What started as loss had become something that gave others light in their darkest hours. Months after the interview, I received a letter from a woman who said she saw herself in my story. She had been hiding her own husband's financial betrayal for years. My story gave her the courage to confront him and start over. I sat reading her words, tears forming in my eyes. It made me realize how powerful honesty can be. The pain I once wished away had turned into something that helped others find freedom. I folded the letter and placed it inside my journal beside Libby's old note. Both were reminders of why I kept going. One evening, Libby and Natalie came home together for the weekend. They brought flowers, laughter, and the kind of warmth only family brings. We cooked dinner together, filling the house with familiar smells. Sitting around that same table where everything once fell apart, I looked at their faces and felt a deep sense of peace. The years had changed us, but in all the best ways. They had become strong, fearless women. I had become someone who no longer lived in the past. The pain that once defined us had turned into the bond that now held us together. After dinner, we sat in the living room, watching old home videos. There we were, years younger, smiling, dancing, celebrating birthdays. None of those moments looked broken. Even though I knew what was coming later, it reminded me that happiness, even temporary, still matters. We can't erase the past, but we can decide what to carry forward. I told the girls how proud I was of them, and they told me they were proud of me too. It wasn't just a family reunion. It felt like closure. 3 people who had walked through fire and came out whole. That night, after they went to sleep, I walked through the quiet house. The moonlight touched the walls, the same walls that once heard tears and whispers of betrayal. Now, they felt peaceful. I stopped at the kitchen table, tracing my hand across its surface. So much had happened here. Loss, discovery, justice, and healing. I smiled softly, knowing that everything had come full circle. Life has a way of restoring balance when you least expect it. I whispered a silent thank you to the universe for giving me strength when I thought I had none left to give. The next morning, Natalie showed me something on her phone. It was a clip of our interview circulating again, shared by a page about resilience. The caption read, "A mother's strength rebuilt what betrayal tried to destroy." I didn't know who wrote it, but reading those words brought a lump to my throat. It perfectly described what we had lived. I wasn't embarrassed anymore. I wasn't afraid of being judged. The truth had set me free, and sharing it had helped others find their voice. That realization filled me with the kind of peace I'd been chasing for years. A few months later, I received an invitation to a national conference about family recovery and empowerment. They wanted me to give a keynote speech. I hesitated, unsure if I could stand on that stage and relive everything again. But Libby encouraged me, saying my story deserved to be heard. So I accepted. When the day arrived, I stood before a large audience, lights shining bright, hands trembling slightly. But as soon as I started speaking, the fear disappeared. The story no longer hurt to tell. It had become a story of strength, love, and redemption. When I finished the speech, the audience stood in applause. I wasn't expecting it, and for a moment I couldn't move. I saw faces in the crowd, women, men, even teenagers, nodding, some crying. I realized they weren't just applauding me. They were applauding every person who ever rebuilt their life after betrayal. I stepped off the stage with tears in my eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. The story that began with loss had become a story of victory, not the loud kind with fanfare, but the quiet kind that lives in every healed heart. After the event, a young girl approached me backstage. She said she had been saving money for college, and her father recently tried to take it from her. She had seen my videos and gathered proof before he could. Her voice trembled as she thanked me. I hugged her tightly, realizing that our story had traveled farther than I could ever have imagined. It was no longer just ours. It belonged to every person who refused to let betrayal win. That moment confirmed what I already knew. Our pain had found its purpose, and it was helping others heal. That night in the hotel room, I sat by the window, looking at the city lights below. The sound of traffic, the hum of life. It all felt distant but comforting. I thought about Brian for the first time in months, not with anger but with understanding. He had destroyed himself long before he tried to destroy us. His choices had consequences that shaped us all differently. For him, it was downfall. For us, it was growth. I didn't forgive him because he deserved it. I forgave him because I refused to let his shadow darken our light anymore. When I returned home, I found a small package waiting at the door. Inside was a framed photograph that Libby had sent ahead of time. It showed the three of us, me, Libby, and Natalie, standing outside the courthouse the day we finalized the divorce. She had written a small note beneath the picture. "We won, Mom, not just the case, but our lives." I hung it on the living room wall. Every time I looked at it, I felt the same warmth that had carried us through everything. It was a reminder of how far love can take you. Life continued with a rhythm that finally felt natural. Work, friends, small joys. They filled my days with meaning. I started gardening again, something I hadn't done since before the chaos began. Watching plants grow from tiny seeds reminded me of how growth happens, quietly, slowly, but surely. Sometimes I'd spend hours outside, trimming leaves, breathing fresh air, and thinking about how beautiful renewal can be. The garden became my peaceful place, a symbol of everything we'd survived. Each flower that bloomed felt like a message from life itself. Pain may bury you, but love always helps you rise again. Libby called one weekend to say she was getting engaged. Her voice was full of joy. She said her fiancé knew everything about our past and respected what we'd been through. That mattered most to her, honesty. I could hear the calm confidence in her tone. The same calm she had the day she told me she had handled it. She had learned to value truth above all else, and that was my proudest achievement as a mother. The thought of her starting her own family didn't scare me. It filled me with hope. She deserved every ounce of happiness. When the wedding day came, I watched her walk down the aisle, radiant and peaceful. Natalie stood beside her as maid of honor, and I sat in the front row, smiling through tears. The ceremony wasn't grand or loud. It was intimate and full of love. As they exchanged vows, I thought about how far we'd come. The same family, once broken by lies, was now surrounded by honesty, trust, and joy. When Libby turned to look at me and smiled, I knew she wasn't just thanking me for being there, she was thanking me for never giving up. After the wedding, Natalie and I helped pack gifts and clear the hall. As we worked, she whispered that she had been offered a position overseas. She said she was nervous, but ready to take the leap. I hugged her tightly and told her she was more than ready. She had already faced things most people couldn't imagine. This new chapter was hers to write. Watching both my daughters step confidently into their futures felt like the final chapter of our shared journey. The pain that once held us hostage had transformed into pure freedom. When the girls left for their new lives, the house felt quiet again, but this time it was a comforting kind of quiet. I walked through each room, smiling instead of crying. The silence no longer meant loneliness, it meant peace. I realized that life had come full circle. I had raised two women who knew how to protect themselves, stand tall, and love deeply. That was my greatest accomplishment. I sat in the living room, looking at our framed photo, and whispered that I was proud of us. We hadn't just survived, we had rebuilt something unbreakable. Years later, my story was still being shared online. People continued reaching out, saying how much it helped them. Some even called it the college fund story. I smiled whenever I saw those words. What began as heartbreak had become hope for thousands. Libby and Natalie both had families of their own now, and sometimes, when they visited with their kids, we'd laugh about how everything started with one phone recording. That single moment of bravery had changed everything. It wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up for truth, even when truth hurts. One afternoon, Libby's daughter found the old phone I had kept in a drawer. She asked what it was, and I told her it was the phone that helped her mom and aunt save their future. Her eyes widened with curiosity, and she asked if I was scared back then. I told her I was, but I also told her that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing despite it. She smiled and said she wanted to be brave like her mom someday. I smiled back, knowing bravery ran in her blood already. Natalie's children were older, curious about technology, and always asking questions. She told them about her app and how it started from a real experience. She didn't hide the truth, but she framed it as a story about resilience. Listening to her explain it to them made me realize that our story had become something timeless, a lesson passed down through generations. Pain had turned into protection, and our journey had turned into guidance. Watching my daughters teach their own children made me understand that the legacy of truth never fades. It only grows stronger. Sometimes, when everyone visited together, I'd sit on the porch watching them talk, laugh, and live freely. The sound of their voices filled me with gratitude. None of this would have existed if we hadn't fought back when we did. One choice to uncover the truth had changed the course of all our lives. I didn't dwell on the past anymore. It had served its purpose. What mattered was the love surrounding me now. Family laughter replaced old arguments. Joy replaced fear. I finally understood that healing isn't a moment. It's a lifetime of choosing peace over pain. On the anniversary of the day Brian left, I visited the old bank branch where the college account had been opened. It was just symbolic, but it felt important. Standing there, I thought about the woman I was back then, tired, anxious, scared of losing everything. I wanted to tell her that she would survive, that she would see her daughters succeed, that she would find peace again. I smiled softly, knowing that every version of me had played a role in getting here. None of it was wasted. Even the heartbreak had its reason. It built everything beautiful that followed. As I left the bank, I saw a mother and daughter standing in line, filling out forms together. They looked like we once did. Hopeful, trusting, unaware of how fragile trust can be. It made me want to protect them somehow, to tell them what I'd learned. But I didn't need to. The world already knew our story, and maybe, somewhere along the way, it had already reached them. That thought gave me comfort. I didn't need to warn everyone personally. The story itself had become its own kind of shield, protecting others quietly, just like my daughters once did for me. Back home, I opened my journal one last time. It was thick now, full of letters, memories, and reflections from the years that followed. I turned to the first page, the one I wrote on the day I found the empty account. The handwriting was shaky, filled with pain and disbelief. I read those words carefully, then smiled. That woman had no idea how strong she would become. I closed the journal and placed it on the shelf beside my book, my reminder that stories can begin in pain and still end in peace. Ours was proof of that. As the evening settled, I sat outside watching the sun dip below the horizon. The world was quiet, the air still. I thought about everything: the betrayal, the discovery, the confrontation, the rebuilding. It all felt distant now, like a storm I had watched from afar. What remained wasn't bitterness, but gratitude. We had taken back what was ours, not just money but dignity. We had rebuilt trust, not in others, but in ourselves. I whispered to the sky, thanking whatever force had guided us through. Some battles end not with revenge, but with peace that lasts forever. The years that followed were gentle. Libby's family visited often, Natalie called every week, and my garden flourished more each season. I grew older, surrounded by laughter, stability, and love. The fear that once ruled my life had no place here anymore. Sometimes I'd look out the window at the garden and think of one simple truth: we can't control what others do to us, but we can control what we grow from it. I chose to grow peace, and that choice changed everything. The storm that once destroyed me had also watered the roots of my strength. Looking back now, I see that everything began the day my daughters pressed record on that phone. That single act of courage changed our lives. It exposed lies, saved our future, and reminded us of our power. I once believed betrayal broke us, but I was wrong. It revealed who we truly were: strong, united, and unafraid. The money returned, the truth came out, and the man who betrayed us disappeared. But what stayed was love, honesty, and resilience. We didn't just survive betrayal, we defeated it, together, and that became the story of our lives.